What's going on, guys? Apathettic here with all your tips, recommendations, and everything in between. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the recent changes to Shadebinder that came with the latest update on March 23rd, why Shadebinder could be worth your time in PvP. I'm going to break down the changes to Shadebinder, what fragments and aspects you should use, and my tips for optimizing your effectiveness when using this subclass. But before that, I also have a Discord for people looking to team up, discuss builds, or ask questions, so consider joining the Discord using the link below if you're looking to connect with some like-minded Destiny players. With that, let's get into it. Starting with the changes made to Shadebinder and the Shadebinder subclass, released on March 23rd, which is update 3.1.1.1. Winter's Wrath. Improved tracking of Winter's Wrath projectiles, now tracking strength decays from its max value over 10 seconds instead of 2.2 seconds. And what this results in is the tracking on Winter's Wrath being a lot more aggressive. I'm sure you guys have seen some clips of it basically doing a giant circle and still hitting your target. So it's definitely a lot more effective, which I felt was one of the opportunities with this super before. Next, they also increased the size of the Warlock Super's projectile proximity detonation radius, 1.5 meters to 1.65, again making it just a little bit easier to land those 3 projectiles that you fire from the Warlock Super. The proximity detonation now starts at its largest scale and scales down to 40% over time. And essentially what this means is that AoE effect, or that detonation you do, the shatter you try to do after freezing an enemy in your super, it now decays and that radius gets smaller over time, which I think is a good change, especially with how much more aggressive the tracking is now. Moving on to Penumbral Blast. Decrease Penumbral Blast damage against players from 80 to 30 damage. PvE damage is unchanged. This is a good change. 80 to 30 was a lot of damage, but we're going to talk about a little bit later why Penumbral Blast is still going to be very good if you use it correctly. Iceflare Bolts is up next. Fix a bug where Iceflare Bolts continuously try to switch targets. Increase target acquisition range of Iceflare Bolts by 33%. Increase turning speed of Iceflare Bolts so they can more effectively hit nearby targets. And so this is a nice change. There were times where with Iceflare Bolts, it would kind of get stuck or, not really track onto anyone, or it would switch between targets as this mentioned. And so this is gonna make this little perk a lot more effective, which is a much welcome change. Getting into aspects and fragments and how to set up your Shadebinder subclass up for success is we're going to start with our abilities. And the first thing I always use here is Empowering Rift. The reason I use Empowering Rift is mainly because 120 hand cannons are the meta right now. And so with an Empowering Rift on Warlock, that is just another ability you're able to use to help you 2-tap across the map with these weapons. So I definitely recommend this. Healing Rift is still really good, but again, the power of an Empowering Rift combined with a 120 is really hard to look past right now. As far as your jump, you want to make sure you're using Burst Glide. That's going to allow us to move around the map as quickly as possible. Next up, Penumbral Blast, our only option here. And with Penumbral Blast, really the best way to use it is you want to use it when you're flying in on someone, or almost using it defensively. So when someone's trying to slide in on you, you want to throw that Penumbral Blast proactively, trying to anticipate when your enemy is coming so you can get that easy freeze. And you want to try to always have your special weapon out, because with Stasis and some of the changes they've made, your primary weapon doesn't do as much damage when you get that freeze. So once you get that freeze, you're going to fly in with a shotgun or a sniper if you're using one, because that's going to do more damage than a primary. Next up, we have our Cold Snap Grenade, and that's what I'm running here, especially with the changes to Dustfield and the fact that Warlocks don't really have anything that really interacts well with the Glacier Grenade. And we're going to talk more once we start talking about our fragments, about why Cold Snap and Penumbral are so strong on Warlock and how we can really synergize them to get the most out of it. But I definitely recommend this grenade for Warlock specifically. Talking about our aspects, we have Frost Pulse here. This is where casting your Rift generates a shockwave that freezes nearby combatants. This is okay. It doesn't always work the best, but you will find yourself in those situations where if you pop a Rift and the enemy happens to catch you off guard, they're end up getting frozen, so not bad there. Then next we have Ice Flare Bolts, which received a nice buff as we read in the update. Shattering a frozen target spawns seekers that track and freeze other nearby targets. And these are essentially, it spawns additional Cold Snap Grenades is what it looks like. And so this is great, especially with the super. So when you shatter those enemies, if there's any enemies around those enemies that you shattered, they're going to get frozen as well because of these Ice Flare Bolts. Or if you freeze them with Penumbral Blast or a Cold Snap and you shatter them or kill them, it's going to spawn those seekers to help you freeze even more enemies and generate more kills. So definitely Iceflare bolts, no brainer here. As for our fragments, starting for our first one, we are running Whisper of Torment. You gain grenade energy each time you take damage from targets, and this is super helpful. It's not going to give you a whole ton of grenade energy, but just a little bit is going to be enough, because with the longer cooldowns of stasis, anything we can do to help our ability regen be even faster is going to be helpful, especially with how much we're going to be wanting using our cold snap and getting those freezes. Next up, we have Whisper of Durance, and the reason I use Whisper of Durance, not because we're using actually any slow abilities, but basically because I'm using it to offset Whisper of Hedrons, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm using this just for the +10 strength, which is going to offset that -10 strength from Whisper of Hedrons. And also, for anybody wondering what my stats are, they're in this bottom left hand corner, and I typically run high recovery and high intellect, so you can pause the screen here if you want to really take a hard look at my stats. Moving on, we have Whisper of Hedrons, gain a bonus to weapon damage after freezing a target with stasis. And so this is really the fragment that ties this whole subclass's neutral game together for me, because using Penumbral Blast and Cold Snap, you're going to be freezing enemies a lot of the time. And so it's very easy once you get some of these initial freezes with either Penumbral Blast or Cold Snap to want to fly in and go for the kill to get the finish. But a lot of times what will end up happening is, because you become so aggressive once you get that freeze, you end up pushing yourself out of position or into a double or triple team. And maybe you get the kill, but maybe you end up dying right after. So was it really worth it? Instead, what I like to do is I like to use Penumbral Blast and Cold Snap as another way to get a damage boost for my 120. And so the more freezes I can get, I'm gonna get a base almost 25% damage boost from Whisper of Hedrons. And so basically what I try to do is I try to get the Cold Snap freeze, and if I can push in safely and get the kill, of course I will. But I mainly use it to try to get that damage boost. So once they break out, they will not be expecting my weapons to be doing as much damage as they are. And so that way I can play a little bit more passively with my 120 and get those easy 2-taps. Or once I get that freeze, remember the damage boost from Whisper of Hedrons applies to all your weapons, including a shotgun or sniper if you're using one. So for me, I main a shotgun, which I highly recommend on this subclass. So you get that freeze, and now you're flying in with your shotgun. Now it has a 25% damage boost, as if it even needed it. And then lastly, we have Whisper of Refraction. Defeating slowed or frozen targets grants you class ability energy. I love this fragment because it just allows me to get that Empowering Rift a lot more frequently. Running 100 recovery, you're going to be getting it a lot, but again, with Whisper of Refraction, you're just doubling up on that, especially with abilities like Penumbral Blast and Cold Snap, which again is going to allow us to get that Empowering Rift. And it's just more 2-taps, guys, when you combine Empowering Rift with Whisper of Hedrons. If you have a hand cannon with Rampage, or you have Higher Energy Fire, you're looking at multiple ways you can 2-tap with your 120 and really become very, very lethal on this subclass. So now that we've talked about how I set up my Shadebinder Warlock subclass, I want to talk a little bit about how to best use it to get the most out of this subclass. So as I stated earlier, talking a little bit about my stats just briefly, you want to be getting as close as you can to tier 10 intellect as possible, or else the cooldown on the Shadebinder super is very long. So the lower you can get that cooldown for the super, the better. As far as the grenade and melee, if you can get those low as well, that's great. But the main thing I would focus on is recovery and intellect. As far as how to play this subclass optimally, you want to be using your freezes primarily to get that damage boost, as I mentioned earlier, from Whisper of Hedrons. You don't want to play overly aggressive. You want to be really tactful with how you use your freezes with Penumbral Blast and Cold Snap Grenade. And how I personally typically use them, I typically use the Cold Snap and Penumbral Blast more defensively. I tend to use Penumbral Blast to try to anticipate when someone's rushing me, or they're especially effective against super. So when a super like a striker or a behemoth, even a spectral blades, some of these supers can be hard to hit with Penumbral Blast. But if you can catch them slipping, you can easily get that freeze and finish them off with your shotgun. And the same thing with Cold Snap Grenade. If I'm weak and I'm on the other side of a corner, I will proactively throw a Cold Snap Grenade at my feet, knowing it's going to track right over them. Once I get the freeze, that's when I'm falling in, because I know now they're much closer to me and it's a lot less dangerous for me to push out and get that kill, because I'm not having to cover a lot of ground to get to them, because I know they were already coming to me. So that's how I basically recommend using these abilities. A lot of these abilities, people think they're meant to be very offensive. I use them very defensively, especially against supers or when I'm weak and I know enemies are going to be aggressive against me. And so just remember that Cold Snap, again, is just super effective against freezing supers, which is one of my favorite things about it. But mainly using those freezes as well to remember that you're going to get that boost from Whisper of Hedrons that you also get when getting freezes from Winter's Wrath. So once you come out of your super, if you come out of your super and live, once you come out, you're gonna have that 25% damage boost as well. So have that hand cannon out, get those 2 taps, and rack up those kills. As for the super, I would say the changes to Winter's Wrath are what really makes Shadebinder worth your time on Warlock again. Before, the neutral game was okay. You really had to play it kind of like how I'm talking about, a little bit more defensively. But you get in those situations, especially in trials, where you go to pop your super and everyone would just get away from you, or it'd be very easy to whiff the projectiles that you would fire out of your super. Versus now, this is going to be an amazing super for shutting down enemy supers or killing multiple enemies because of how aggressive the tracking is. But you have to be careful because this super is still relatively squishy. It's going to be easy to be shotgun melee out of it. So you want to make sure when you pop it, you have some distance between you and your enemy, but you have to really be tactful because people are still going to be able to escape from you if you pop it too soon and too far away, and you have to cover too much ground. So keep that in mind. But I would primarily use it for shutting down supers, or if the opportunity presents itself, pop it with about a medium distance between you and your enemies, so that way you don't have a ton of ground to cover to make this super effective. Overall, guys, I'm absolutely loving Shadebinder right now. I'm super interested to be trying it in trials this weekend. But let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about Shadebinder and the changes of Stasis overall in the Crucible? And if you're looking to continue to improve your Warlock gameplay, make sure you check out my playlist on the screen with all the Warlock tips my channel has to offer. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, as they're all free ways to support me. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.